The Ukraine war has dragged on for nearly 2 years now. It's easy to forget how ubiquitous the support for aid was at the time. Poll after poll showed Americans willing to pay higher gas prices, sustain major supply chain shock, and hurt American interests in the short term as long as it meant helping Ukraine. And within that debate was a big fight that I had with many about the nature of bipartisanship and the priorities for American politicians and much of our media class. I would classify many of these people as Ukraine firsters, meaning that their chief agenda is Ukrainian sovereignty, with many American interests secondary. My challenge at that time was the baby formula crisis, for example. It was sweeping the nation. And I said in one debate, I believed absolutely that most American elites cared far more about Ukraine than they did about Americans getting baby formula. The argument was that we can care about both. And what I've always said, show me what gets effortless bipartisanship and is spent without question, and I will show you where power really lies. Well, we have an easy answer, I think, to those questions 2 years into this war. American politicians and most of the American commentariat are Ukraine firsters, perhaps even more than we thought. In the midst of a major fight about a government shutdown, quietly, behind the scenes, machinations have been made. The Pentagon has ensured Ukrainian aid will not be touched. Secretly, without any congressional authorization, the Pentagon has made a new change to its rules. Through bureaucratic trickery, the Pentagon has internally decided any Ukraine operation will be exempt from a potential government shutdown, meaning that, quote, key training and other activities in support of Kyiv will move ahead uninterrupted. Which means, in plain English, if a government shuts down, millions of everyday American citizens will not get a paycheck. Veterans will not get benefits. Services for all of us will diminish. But people in Kyiv, they're going to get paid. You can't even make it up. Who they decide to pay, even when they don't have the constitutional authority to do so, shows you who our government really cares the most about. And it's decidedly Ukraine. 60 Minutes inadvertently revealed the historic degree to which the United States is not only propping up Ukraine's military, but is backstopping their entire economy and civil society. Take a listen to some of the stuff they found that we're funding over there.
American taxpayers are financing more than just weapons. We discovered the US government's buying seeds and fertilizer for Ukrainian farmers and covering the salaries of Ukraine's first responders, all 57,000 of them. That includes the team that trains this rescue dog, named Joy, to comb through the wreckage of Russian strikes looking for survivors. And the US also funds the divers, who we saw clearing unexploded ammunition from the country's rivers to make them safe again for swimming and fishing. Russia's invasion shrank Ukraine's economy by about a third. We were surprised to find that to keep it afloat, the US government is subsidizing small businesses.
So the US government is funding every single first responder in Ukraine. The US government is buying all the seeds and fertilizer for their farmers. What they leave out there about that small business, by the way, is that it's funding one woman, for example, a woman named Tatiana Abromova. She has a knitwear company. She's a small shop in Kyiv who US government officials have assisted in keeping afloat and have even helped her find new customers overseas. It must be nice to be a Ukrainian knitwear company. I know a lot of people over here who would love it if the government paid their bills and then found them customers. As a small business owner myself with Krystal, I cannot tell you how much time we spend making sure our finances are straight, payroll, making sure it runs properly, the trains have to run on time. In many ways, it's even harder than doing the show every day. I know farmers too. They struggle on the knife's edge of making their mortgage payments, and they battle with big grain companies over seeds and fertilizer. Meanwhile, those in Kyiv don't have to worry about anything. The government has got their back. Our government. Perhaps some of this sounds callous, and I really don't want it to. I'm not opposed to aid to Ukraine, only within reason, which advances our interests. At this moment, we are not only backstopping their entire military, we are backstopping their entire civil society. Biden and establishment Republicans, they say, we're going to back Ukraine as long as it takes. It's clear that means not only do the weapons have to flow, putting us in danger of perhaps embroiling into a larger war with Russia, but we've got to backstop their whole civil society for the foreseeable future. Does that seem fair to you? Or does it seem like we've done our part now? If Europe wants to step up and they can be our guest, if they want to pay these people's bills. But with the US, the farthest away and the least at stake, shouldn't we have to pay? Why should we have to pay the vast majority of these countries' bills? Recently, there was a concerted campaign to fool the American public with talk of how the Europeans have overtaken the US in aid to Ukraine. And that's a fun talking point. It happens to also be totally false. They do this by focusing on non-military aid commitments over many years, which the governments have pledged to spend but have not appropriated and not actually spent. When you take that away, what do you find? Shocker. Turns out the US has provided the vast majority of all military aid, the only one that also matters. Also, even whenever you take away the so-called EU classification and you look at it by country, guess who's still providing the vast majority of aid to Ukraine? You guessed it, us. The amount of this side that we have dispersed is vastly disproportionate to our actual interests, and worse, is honestly feeding unrealistic expectations in Kyiv. Do they just expect us to pay these Knitmakers bills forever, even after the war is over? The answer is probably at this point yes, and the secret answer from US politicians to that question is also yes. I mean, how crazy is that?
Hey guys, obviously I had a lot of thoughts on what Saagar had to say there. So if you want to see my thoughts on this monologue and every other Saagar monologue, make sure you subscribe at breakingpoints.com.